So, okay, before we get into this video, if you're not already subscribed to this channel, please subscribe, thumbs this video up, and click the notification bell so you can get all my updates. But anyways, let's talk about the video. Okay, so I was digging around some more prototype data, and as always, it seems like, the answer's always right in front of us, and we seem to find more stuff. But I went on the cutting room floor where they actually leaked a bunch of stuff before. And it's not like, you're not going to find a lot of the stuff that I found, but there's something that was listed on there for the longest time. We're talking about years before like Gen 1's data started coming out, when someone hacked Nintendo or their servers and leaked a bunch of stuff, even the Helix chamber when they started talking about it, because this is where it really started coming back. The way they presented it was kind of wrong, but what the data that they did find though was actually true though. It was just a cover story they used though. Somebody hacked Nintendo servers and they leaked a bunch of useful data that we never would have found out. And if you actually go into the Gen 1 games, the actual final version of the games, the debug modes that were actually allegedly taken out of the games, you can actually still find some of the data that was actually there. But what happened was they took out even more stuff, because the stuff that was originally in that was that like some of the older Pokemon, like some of the beta maps, some of the beta trainers that they used. And I mean, that stuff was finally restored in a prototype, a later build, because they had more information to go back on. And we finally had the evidence we needed to support some of these claims, these Pokemon and the whatnot. So this will be proof, even further proof, that the data that we did find really is real, and it really just came out like Nintendo. They just didn't want to get sued by Nintendo because, somebody found, some of the data that they weren't talking about anymore. Kind of interesting stuff. So one of the things we want to talk about is in the beta version, or in the debug mode, there was reasons to believe that Red was actually called Nten, and your rival, instead of Green or Gary, they called him Sony, because believe it or not, at the time, this is when Nintendo was being big rivals with Sony and Nintendo. So they were kind of doing this as kind of like a placeholder sort of thing. You would start out with the characters that Red would start off with, in Palatown, obviously. He would have a Pikachu, an Articuno, a Dugtrio. What were the other two? I think it was a Zapdos, and then there was another one. Can't remember. But, oh yeah, no, he didn't have a Zapdos. It was a Jolteon and something else. In the game's version though, that was like he had 5 Pokemon though, and that was it though. But the thing was though, if you actually dug around the game's data a little bit, you'd find out that he actually had 6 Pokemon. But the one Pokemon that he actually had was the Mechagodzilla, which was one of the major things that inspired Satoshi Tajiri to create the Pokemon series. Again, like Ultraman 7, the Power Rangers, aka, the old Tokyo Monster movies. But Omega wasn't in the game. Omega, I believe, was recycled into Blastoise, but if we actually had both of them, I do believe that Blastoise still wouldn't have been part of Squirtle's line of Blastoise, still would have existed, because that's what Blastoise would have evolved into when it was a baby. War Turtle would have evolved into another Pokemon, and you also have like some of the other Pokemon too that have just been moved around and we're still trying to figure out. So if none of this stuff was ever scrapped, we just would have had more data and longer games, of course. But now I'm actually curious, because as far as the debug mode goes in this Pokemon game, I'm wondering if like some of the maps are a little bit different in the prototype. So I'm gonna do like a playthrough of the debug mode and kind of, because that was kind of interesting. Like, that's kind of how I found out a while ago. You might remember, if you follow this channel, how I talked about how in the Sylph League, Erica, you couldn't fight Erica for some strange reason because it just wasn't registered. It was like registered like she was already beaten. And she always talked about how she wanted to redecorate the place, the Sylph League. Again, the Sylph Co. and the Sylph League, and it doesn't seem too far-fetched because Sabrina should have been the last gym leader, but with Giovanni being, the main villain, who would have been the main villain if Giovanni wasn't in the game, So I think that's why they kind of, they had this confusion to begin with, and, you had the whole story centered around, like, Mewtwo was really the main focus, so it didn't come into view until later on, but, what was Giovanni really after? A corrupt businessman who was after strong Pokemon. You had Team Rocket raiding people and all that, but but Red was always there to get in his way, you know, and Giovanni couldn't even stop him. So then after, you know, Giovanni figured out what he was really doing, you know, he went out of his way to disappear for a while, and then, you know, some of the members of Team Rocket couldn't believe it, so they were trying to like reform it themselves, and then Gold or Ethan came into the picture and you know, basically ruined them 3 years later, you know, and then Red, you fight Red at Mount Silver, and that was basically the story that we got in the last 2 games. So yeah, it's interesting how they changed that. But what else was I going to say? Okay, so we also have in the prototype data that some of the maps could have been a little bit different, like based on like maybe some of the Pokemon that you couldn't catch could have actually had more data as far as like some of the Pokemon I didn't find in the original. So maybe I like I said, I'm gonna run through it. If I find any differences, I'll record it. But yeah, this is just proof that the debug mode that was actually found in the versions that was later removed, you know, so they could make place for Mew, which again would replace Omega in slot 21. But I do believe Mew would have been in slot 191 if we are to believe that there were originally 191 Pokemon at least. Satoshi Tajiri did state that there were at least 300 something designs they had before Gen 3 or Gen 2. But the thing was, you know, even if we go back and look at some of the prototype data for Gen 1 or Gen 2, it actually starts at index 300 and it just goes off from there. So Satoshi Tajiri wasn't lying when he said that, but what are the index numbers for, what are the other Pokemon that they didn't use that they created for Gen 1? Because I think a lot of it was Gen 2 material, but a lot of that stuff was still lost. You know, we still don't know index number. So basically, if you're really, you know, if we're going to go based on an index number count, the one where Rhydon is the very first Pokemon, not Bulbasaur in the National Dexter. Basically, Rhydon would be number 1, and then let's say Mew, instead of it being number 21, would be Omega, and then Mew would be like all the way out, like right next to Chikorita, or not Chikorita. Whatever Pokemon comes after 192 or 191, because that's as far as I got. And then there's a few other slots in between that we're still missing. I believe it's, you know, I still believe 135 was supposed to be Baby Kangaskhan, but it was 182, 183, and 184 the ones that were still missing. And then there was another one, I can't identify it, but I think it's still missing though. We don't have any pictures or any back sprites of it. It's kind of interesting how for the Baby Kangaskhan, I recognized it took a while to really kind of stare at it. It's like a picture of a blob because it's like low quality, and I'm not really sure how you can really restore that. But after I looked at it and I compared it to Marowak and all that, like, you know, the way its skull looks on the back and all that, I wouldn't be surprised that that's actually what Baby Kangaskhan looks like, because it does look like its mother a lot, you know. But I think the reason that was scrapped was because they didn't have time to program it in, or they probably thought Cubone was basically the closest thing to it being a mother. But then it created this, you know, we're still trying to figure out exactly how Kangaskhan was related to Marowak and Cubone, but, you know, based on what we found and based on what they've put into the games, I think we really do have enough evidence to go off of, like, how we can really make it look, how it makes sense. You know, it's like a different form of a kangaroo, but maybe it's just a different story about how it came to be, because Marowaks and Kangaskhan's, you know, probably do see each other a lot, but we just don't see it though. And how rare Kangaskhan really is, that's not to say that it's so rare it's almost extinct. It's just rare that you have to be at the same, you know, you have to be at certain areas and you're more likely to see them. They live in caves, you'll find them in graveyards, kind of like Marowak, sort of, you know, hanging around in a tribe, basically. Kangaskhan's always hanging out with its baby, and the baby's always, you know, hanging around with its mother until it grows up, and then it too becomes a Kangaskhan or maybe something else. But yeah, but like I said, I'm still digging around more data, and, you know, it's just going to be more proof that the prototype data really does exist. And it's not just something that somebody made up like some people like to think it is. But you know, it's just interesting to think though that if there ever was a leak on something that a lot of people just didn't understand, that would be basically where to start. You know, was it just a cover story for them, or was it really fan made by somebody else trying to pretend like it wasn't? If it was actually something that was leaked from somebody's server, yeah, you can most definitely think that, yeah, that's proof that right there it's got to be something real at some point, that it had to have been like from their servers that they had on a previous build of the game, and what it could have been in the end if they would have finished it, you know, whether it was due to cartridge limitations or a full version of the game. I'll throw this out there right now. If anybody, if anybody's watching this and, you know, you want to know where, if anybody has never played like the Helix Chamber hack and you think you can't find it, I actually have a copy of it if you want to check it out. Again, the data is real, but the front sprites for some of the Pokemon that weren't part of the original 151, they kind of went back and redid them. But everything else is legit though. So, like I said, if you want to check it out, message me. I can help you find it. It's kind of hard to find, but it's still out there though, nonetheless. But it's just a lot of people don't know it exists, and that's kind of why when I made this channel, I wanted more people to know that the stuff existed, because it seemed like they actually were the only ones that seemed to have gotten their hands on something that was worth noting, that before nobody had ever really seen it. So, being a huge Pokemon fan, I mean, this is a big deal, obviously, but, you know, like I said, if I find any differences between the final version of the games versus, like, you know, the data that was actually cut, you know, I'll definitely make videos about it. But this is just kind of something to really kind of tamper with right now and really look at it from a distance and say, you know, yeah, I guess there really is a lot of reasons to believe that there really was a difference between the games and what we got, whether due to time constraints and cartridge limitations, and maybe they changed their mind on some stuff but made it better in the end. But who knows, like, really in the end, what they could have done and what it could have been, because it seems like even some of the stuff they found in Gen 2's prototype that was later, you know, eventually reworked into Pokemon Reforged, another Pokemon ROM hack. It's actually interesting to see how much different Gen 2 was, and it kind of made me think like how much different Gen 1 was in some aspects that perhaps maybe we should go back and check out. So I don't know. It's really interesting to really think like how different a series like Pokemon could have really been. All the games, they have so many ideas, but there's so many ideas that get scrapped too. Even more ideas that we even can come up with, believe it or not. So that's actually something to think about. So, you know, what else is waiting to be discovered and what we haven't found yet, you know, that's a whole nother story. But again, we'll find it in time. But it's interesting to think like, you know, Pokemon's 30 years old. I mean, if we were to go back to like 1989 when it was just capsule monsters and Kapumon and all that, and, you know, and then later on, you know, I do remember Yu-Gi-Oh, you know, King of Games. You know, even when Yu-Gi-Oh first came out, they actually had their own saga of capsule monsters that they got directly from Pokemon. And a lot of people don't know that, believe it or not. You know, they actually did that when the copyright, when they realized that Satoshi Tajiri wasn't going to use that as the title, they went ahead and, you know, somebody else went ahead and took that name because it was popular at the time. So maybe that was another reason why Yu-Gi-Oh kind of, you know, it got a lot of attention in some aspects too, because, you know, not just because of what it was, but, you know, the saga names actually, I always wondered why they called it Capsule Monsters. And then after seeing, like, because that came out in like roughly 1997-ish. And then later on we find out that Pokemon had that same idea like prior, like 5-10 years before that, but they never used it. And I was like, oh, so that explains why they never went ahead and did it. So yeah, anyways, it's interesting. You learn something new every day, and wow, it's like you really can take something you think you know so well and you're still learning new things about it. So it's crazy to think like how many things we don't know versus what we do know.